This happened one summer night when I was living alone during university. When I went to visit a friend, he was burning some incense at home. I thought it was pretty cool and wanted to try it myself, so I stopped by an Asian-style grocery store to grab some, and then lit it once I got home. Gradually, the smell of incense filled the room, but it was kind of different to what I had imagined, so I put it out. I realized I didn't really like incense in the first place. I opened the window to let some air in, then sat on the veranda, watching the cars go by while I waited. Suddenly, I looked at my shadow being cast in the room, but it was moving in a direction that it shouldn't have been able to, like it was being lit up from behind. I thought that maybe it was because of some car headlights in front of me, but there were no cars passing by at that moment. What the hell? I thought. And then the shadow that was shaped like a person suddenly moved towards the veranda and then disappeared into the darkness. It was almost obong, so perhaps I had confused something by lighting incense. I haven't lit any since then again. Hey guys, I'm your host Tara A. Devlin, and welcome to this week's episode of Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. In case you missed it, Toshiden Exploring Japanese Urban Legends Volume 4 is now available. Once again, there are a host of new legends to explore, both horrifying, bizarre, and otherwise. And of course, a new season of the podcast to go with it. That started just recently, so if you haven't checked it out yet, it's available right now. This week, we're heading inside for some terrifying tales set in and around buildings. What lurks in the walls? What hides in the ceilings? What's beyond that corner where you just can't see? First up, a young man moves into a new apartment that seems almost too good to be true, yet is also incredibly cheap. You know how these things go. But what's really making this place so cheap? Find out in Dangerous Apartment. This happened at the apartment I lived in 2 years ago. I decided it was time to move, and the real estate company suggested an apartment that was rather cheap through a connection they had. It was a 1-bedroom apartment with a loft and great natural sunlight. It had lots of storage space, was close to public transport, and there wasn't a single thing I could complain about, so I snatched it right away. So, at the time, I had a cat. The previous apartment building was fine with pets, but I forgot to get permission to bring the cat with me before moving. It'll work out somehow, I thought, as I brought the cat with me. The cat was toilet trained and didn't meow much, so I wasn't especially worried. Once I was done introducing myself to my new neighbours, I went to check out the nearby supermarket, and that was the end of moving day. As I went to go to bed, everything still lying around the apartment, I noticed the cat was acting strange. He was facing the door, frozen, and he was growling in a really low voice at something. I'd never seen him act like that before. Maybe there's a stray cat outside, I thought, and figuring he'd get used to it soon enough, I quickly fell asleep. But the next day, and the day after that, every single evening he would do the same thing again. This is really weird, I thought, and so I approached my growling cat. Then I sensed a person standing on the other side of the door. It wasn't like a ghost or anything like that. It was clearly a living and breathing person. I wanted to fling the door open, but I was too scared. I mean, I never had the guts to do anything like that to begin with. In the end, I grabbed the cat, careful not to make any noise, and then took him back to the main room. I closed the sliding door behind me and then got back into bed. It wasn't like there was anything else I could do. But still, the cat sat there, staring through the sliding doors to the entrance. This went on day after day, and over the next 3 months, I barely got any sleep. I decided it was time to move again. I'd lost 10 kilos and my doctor said that I was clearly stressed, so I decided to go back to my old apartment. But as I was going around saying goodbye to everyone at the building, they all spoke to me about my cat. "You know you can't have cats here, right? Why do you have one? You have to get permission from the landlord if you want to keep a pet. The landlord is pissed about that cat." But my cat had never once left the room. He had also been neutered, so he didn't meow loudly or anything either. And so I asked the final person I spoke to about it. "How did you even know that I have a cat?" "The landlord told us all to watch your apartment," he said. It seemed that night after night, the residents of the building, under orders from the landlord, stood guard outside my apartment, watching it from the other side of the door. Apparently, they even looked through the letter slot sometimes, and that was how they saw my cat. Like, yeah, I was in the wrong for not getting permission to bring the cat with me beforehand, but they should have just said something to me about it. "That's just what the landlord told us to do," he said. He kept going, and apparently the landlord also told them to check my mail. Of course, they didn't open it, but they did check who it was from and such. Hearing that, I decided I couldn't stay any longer. I was scheduled to leave in a week, but I changed the date and moved out the very next day. It's something I can laugh about now, but at the time, it honestly was horrifying. I never did find out why the landlord was checking my mail, or why the real estate was offering the apartment for so cheap. And I was too scared to ever check for myself. When a friend spends the night, he notices something the resident in this next tale hasn't really seen before. An odd-looking stain on the ceiling. It happens to look just like a face, but what's really going on? Find out in Stain on the Ceiling. When I was a student, I lived in an old wooden apartment in Nedima. I'd been there for about a year when one of my friends came over to stay for the first time. We ended up drinking too much and my friend missed the final train for the night, so he kinda had to stay. My room was a mess, but I cleared a spot for him to sleep, and around 2 a.m, we finally laid down to go to bed. "Hey, that kinda looks like a human face, don't you think?" he said before long, pointing to the ceiling. "It's just a stain. It's probably water leaking from whoever lives up there." One part of the ceiling was dirty, but I'd known about it since I moved in. "Hang on, that's weird." My friend then got up and started inspecting the ceiling. "Can you see it when you're lying down?" I got up, annoyed, and pulled the string to turn on the fluorescent lights. I can't see it anymore. It's just a stain." But my friend ignored me. He grabbed a nearby tennis racket and started tracing the stain with it. "This is the mouth, right? These are the eyes. Here's the nose. Something's not right." Normally I turn the lights off to sleep, but thinking that my friend might need to use the toilet, I left just a small nightlight on. But he insisted that if you were lying down, it looked just like a face. He was so persistent that I also laid down to look at the ceiling. And he was right. It did look like a face. It was the first time I realized that. We're lying with our heads to the north, aren't we? As soon as my friend said that, the entire room started to shake. Both of us gasped and looked around. "It's just an earthquake, right?" Nervously, I stood up and pulled the string for the fluorescent lights. The 40-watt bulb flickered on, and the face of a middle-aged man was clearly floating on the ceiling. My friend and I both screamed and ran from the room. "Shut up!" The sound of someone kicking the wall echoed, and my mind went blank. The voice sounded like it came from the room on the right. Panicking, I stopped my friend who was trying to leave the apartment. "Calm down. Calm down." I felt like if we opened that door right now, there was no telling what might be waiting there for us. "What the hell, man? I'm not spending the night here after that," my friend complained, trying his best not to raise his voice. "No, listen." I stood in front of him, blocking the way. "The apartment next door is empty." My friend looked confused, so I continued. "Nobody lives there." Recently, I had the opportunity to go past that wooden apartment building again. That 40-year-old building is now completely gone. A boy is at home reading one day when his mother calls out for him. But is it really his mother? Is there something else in the house with him? Find out in Window. I heard this story directly from a friend. O was a boy who always loved books. He always had his head in one, and he would keep reading until someone stopped him. He lived in a wooden 2-story house that was several decades old, and he was given a room on the second floor to use as his study room. So, one afternoon, he was relaxing at home like always, his head stuck in an adventure book. Several hours passed, and then he felt like he heard his mother call his name. "Yeah? What is it?" he yelled back. His door was right by the stairs that led to the first floor. His mother always called out to him from down there when it was time for dinner or she needed him for something. But this time, there was no response. Huh? Did I not just hear her voice right now? O thought. He moved and slid the door open just a little. Still lying on the ground, he looked through the door and saw his mother motioning for him to come closer. "What is it?" Finally, he stood up and put a hand on the door to slide it further open. But then, the sliding door disappeared, his mother disappeared, and the ground below filled his vision. Whoa! O wasn't facing the sliding doors. He was on the opposite side of the room, balancing on the window and on the verge of falling outside. If the fall prevention railing had been just a little lower, then... O thought to himself, a chill running down his spine. But what on earth had he just seen? Was it really just an illusion? 2 hours later, his mother came home. Left alone in the house all that time, trembling in fear, O ran to his mother and cried his eyes out as he explained what had happened. A somber, thoughtful look crossed her face, and what she told her son next was entirely unexpected. Recently, strange things have been happening to me too. 2 days ago, when I got back from shopping, I found all the windows in the house open. Of course, nobody was here, and I made sure everything was closed before I left. What on earth is going on here? A young boy goes to play in the park outside while his mother makes lunch, but when he gets there, he finds it eerily empty. What's really going on? Find out in Apartment complex park. Up until the 4th grade, we lived in employment promotion housing, basically an apartment complex. There were 2 buildings, Building 1 and Building 2, and their verandas faced each other. There was a park in the middle. But it wasn't just kids from the apartment complex who played there. Local kids from nearby also played there too. I think during the summer holidays of the 2nd or 3rd grade, I went to the park to play shortly before lunchtime because my mother said it was going to take a little longer. I thought I could play with some kids who had already finished lunch early, or maybe hadn't eaten yet either. But when I got there, the park was empty. I couldn't sense a single person anywhere. It was so quiet that it actually creeped me out, so I ran around, desperately looking for anyone. I don't know why it was there, but in the middle of the park, there was a large concrete circle, and kids often drew pictures there in chalk and such. So I ran over and stood in the middle of that, looking around. But I couldn't sense anyone, and all the verandas were empty as well. The park was normally full of life, and I didn't like how quiet it now was. It was creepy, and there was an unhappy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I wanted nothing more than to go back home, but I couldn't move, so I just stared at the concrete. Then I realized 2 things. For one, the park wasn't just devoid of people. I couldn't even hear the sound of the cicadas. There wasn't a single car or man-made noise either. And second, I realized that I was standing in somebody's large shadow. Was somebody behind me? I jumped in surprise, and although I had been looking so desperately for someone up until that point, I took off running towards home. As soon as I started running, there was a loud sound behind me, but I ran all the way home without turning back once. I flew into the house, out of breath, and my mother was still casually making lunch. I wasn't sure whether I should tell her about what just happened, but in the end, I didn't tell a soul. That being said, I couldn't forget what happened either, and whenever I remembered it, it creeped me out. Even now that I'm grown up, I still regularly think about it. That was the strange experience I had as a child. Putting it down in words really does make it seem like nothing happened, and I couldn't even share it as a scary story at the time. But now that I've grown up, I realized there's more to the story. I moved to Tokyo once I got older, and one time, one of my friends fell from a rather large height, landing right behind me. Despite falling quite some distance, that friend miraculously survived. But the sound I heard that time was exactly the same sound I heard that summer as a child. When I was in the 5th grade, my father finished building our house, so we moved. But my younger sister kept in touch with her friends from the complex. When we went back for a visit one time, we went drinking with one of her friends. And for the first time, I told them about what happened that day, including how that sound I heard sounded just like when my friend fell. My sister's friend lived in that apartment complex long before we did, and she continued living there for a while after we left as well. She also told me something she heard from an elderly couple who had lived there for a long time too. Long before that friend's family moved in, a woman apparently jumped from one of the buildings. But there was something weird about the way she jumped, and everyone who lived nearby at the time knew of the story. Normally, if someone jumps, they first take their shoes off and line them up neatly, right? But apparently, this woman kept her shoes on and jumped wide into the air as she ran off the building. Apparently, she was aiming for that concrete circle in the middle of the park, the part that wasn't regular ground. That sound I heard, being the sound of someone jumping, didn't exactly make for the satisfying ending, but it was an ending either way. But then, my sister's friend made it even more chilling for me. I heard this from her 3 years ago. This might be a little redundant, but before my friend fell, there was something I'd been thinking about. At noon, your shadow is quite small by your feet, right? If you step onto a large shadow at that time, it means that it's not behind you, but rather right above you, right? At some point, I started to realize that. After hearing my sister's friend's stories, I started to believe that was right. If I had looked up at that time, would I have seen something? Thinking that something might have been there makes me sick to my stomach, even now. Can bad dreams run in the family? What if they're not dreams, but perhaps shared memories? Is such a thing even possible? Find out in Bad Dream. One of my classmates in elementary and junior high fell ill 2 or 3 times every single month. He was a skinny, androgynous-looking guy with pale skin, so everyone was worried that he might be the sickly type. But he said that he wasn't. He just kept having bad dreams. Apparently, these dreams were really gross and cruel, and whenever he had them, he woke up feeling unwell. I was pretty good friends with him, and although we went to different high schools, we still hung out sometimes. "Oh yeah, have you still been having those dreams?" I asked him one time, and his face turned serious. "They weren't just regular dreams," he said. "They were something one of his ancestors experienced." This dream was something that everyone on his mother's side had, and both his mother and grandfather had also gone through a period of seeing the same dream. When he heard about it from his mother, she also told him one more thing that was passed down in their family. And that thing was how to cast a certain curse. He wouldn't tell me the details, but he gave a self-deprecating laugh and said, "Pfft, a curse. You want to know what's really a curse? Having those awful dreams all the time." Honestly, I found it all a little hard to believe. He himself said I could choose not to believe him if I wanted to. But recently, I heard about this theory that memories are passed down in one's genes, and I wonder if those bad dreams he has are actually genetic memories. A group of university students with little money get together and spend some time at an unused building belonging to the company of one of their fathers. But is there a reason this building is no longer used? What's lurking in there with them? Please note, this story features depictions of vomit, so if you're uncomfortable with that, feel free to skip ahead to the next one. But this one's called Toilet. I attended a university out in the countryside. Pretty far from civilization, you might say, and most of the students who went there were pretty unassuming people. But once they hit the 4th year of their studies, even these unassuming students would get together the credits they needed to graduate and then take an overseas trip with money they saved from their part-time jobs to celebrate. Personally, I was rather lazy. So even by my 4th year, I didn't yet have all the credits I needed, and I spent most of the money I got from my part-time job as I got it. So a graduation trip was not on the cards for me. But there were a few more guys just like me, and so The four of us went to stay at a recreational facility, or I guess a training center, at a company that one of their dads worked for. It wasn't some big fancy facility, but in recent years, the company rarely used it, so as long as we cleaned and aired out the bedding, we could use it how we saw fit. The four of us were rather poor, so we decided to stay there for a while, piled into the one car, and then made our way over. It took about 2 hours through the mountains with a map, and then we found it. At a glance, it definitely looked like nobody had used it in recent memory, and there didn't appear to be a caretaker either, so the building looked abandoned. When we went inside, it stank of mold, and I got chills thinking that we would really be spending the week here. But if we cleaned it up a little, then it would no doubt be fine. We had a look around first, using the keys we got from my friend's father, and checked each and every room. The layout of the building was rather compact, and like the old man said, there were 2 4-people rooms on the first floor, 4 on the second, and then a communal bath, toilet, dining hall, and kitchen. But there was one door that we couldn't open. It was at the end of the hall on the second floor, with 2 guest rooms on either side. And it didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. Like, it wasn't sealed or anything like that. It was just that none of the keys we had opened it. Judging by the outside of the building and the layout of the rooms, we knew that had to be a toilet. But according to the old man's explanation, this building only had 1 toilet. Well, maybe he just remembered wrong, or perhaps it was broken, and so we put it out of our minds. It was merely a door that we couldn't open. After that, we each went to our assigned areas to clean up, and as the sun was setting, the place finally looked habitable. We decided that each of us would stay in one of the 4 rooms on the second floor. We drank for a bit, and then went back to each of our rooms early to retire for the night, exhausted. I don't know how long I lay in bed for, but even though I was exhausted, I just couldn't fall asleep. As I was dozing off, I heard a sound. Picha! My feet were facing the hall, and the sound came from the other side of the door. What on earth was it? Was I just hearing things? Picha! Picha! This time I clearly heard it twice. The sounds were closer together this time, but I very clearly heard them. It was like water, or something sticky perhaps, falling from a height. I looked at the clock, and it said 3 a.m. What on earth was someone doing at this time of night? Seriously, what the hell? Picha, 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 picha. Unable to bear it any longer, I sat up in bed and called out towards the hall. Who's there? Hey! There was no response. I got out of bed and nervously approached the door. I poked my head out and slowly looked around the hall, and there, down the end, a figure stood in front of that locked door. I couldn't even scream. The only sound was that of my breath getting stuck in my throat. But my legs froze, refusing to run away, and I couldn't tear my eyes off that thing at the end of the hall. The figure was wearing a dirty yukata. It was disheveled, and I could see a woman's underwear beneath it. The figure's arms and legs were terribly thin, but for some reason their stomach protruded like a balloon. One of those thin arms reached up towards the figure's face and then covered its mouth. Their eyes opened wide and then, for a moment, seemed to turn white, before vomit escaped from between their fingers and fell to the floor. Picha, picha, picha. The figure slowly approached me, vomit dripping to the floor. What the hell? Who the hell was that? Hey! Hey! Oh crap, I gotta get out of here. My mind was a mess and my body refused to move. I also couldn't tear my eyes away from whatever it was. Suddenly, its eyes opened even further and more vomit fell from between the fingers covering its mouth. Picha, picha, picha. Feeling like some of that vomit had hit my face, suddenly I came back to my senses and screamed. It was a terrifying scream, and I slammed the door shut behind me and dove back into bed. Then I sensed one of my friends running out of his room, I guess because he heard my scream. What the hell, man? It's the middle of the... Ah! He also screamed. Footsteps ran down the hall. Then it sounded like someone tumbling down the stairs. That woke the other two guys up and they then entered the hall. But this time, I didn't hear any screams. Instead, there was a knock at my door. I opened the door in tears and then pointed to the stairs. The stairs, I said, my voice hoarse. Then I fell to the ground. One of my friends went over to the stairs and found our other friend who had fallen to the bottom. He immediately called an ambulance. It didn't take long for the ambulance to arrive, and it seemed our friend had broken bones in several places, and he was still unconscious, so they took him straight to the hospital. I couldn't bear to stay in that building 1 second longer, so I got in the ambulance and joined him. The next day, I left my friend at the hospital. He had regained consciousness, but he was still undergoing care and couldn't really talk much, and returned to that building alone. I told the other two guys what happened, but, as expected, they didn't see anything. All they saw was our other friend at the bottom of the stairs. At any rate, I didn't want to stay there another second longer, so we packed up our things and left. Who on earth was that figure? And what was up with that locked door? Once we got back, we explained to my friend's father what happened. His eyes shot open in surprise, and then he shared a story with us. 3 years ago, when they were still using that building for training, they held a 2-week seminar there for 12 new employees, with an instructor they hired from outside the company. This seminar was pretty rough, and not only did the employees have to act professionally with regards to the job, but their daily life had strict rules too. Amongst the 12 employees, there was one woman. She was a rather slender woman, but apparently she was a bit of a fussy eater. Of course, the instructor would not permit leftovers, so he forced her to eat everything and wash it down with water. Night after night, she spent her time over that toilet on the 2nd floor, and it almost drove her to a mental breakdown. One night, during the 2nd week of the seminar, the instructor found her by the toilet again. He yelled so loud that everyone in the building could hear him, and ended his reprimand by screaming, "Someone as weak as you is worthless." She sat there, covered in her own filth, and although a few colleagues tried to talk to her after that, she didn't even acknowledge their presence. The next morning, when one of the new employees went to use the toilet, they found that woman dead, the sash of her yukata tied above the door. 6 months after we visited that building, it was torn down. A girl living in a dorm goes to the toilet one night, but on her way back, senses something following her. What's hiding in the dorms with them? Find out in Girls' Dorm. This happened around 2 years ago. I was living in a girls' dormitory at the time, and the shower room was on the first floor. They were private showers, but there was no bath. So there were 2 shower stalls, and if you used the stall at the back, looking from the hallway, then it was like people were looking at you from all directions. It was like being looked at, but also a presence, I guess. Either way, I didn't like it, and nobody else did either, so nobody wanted to use it. I asked one of my friends about it. She had a bit of a sixth sense, and she said she could see a black hazy figure there, and it was best to leave it alone. One night, I woke up needing to go to the toilet. I don't remember what time it was, but it was pitch black and everyone was asleep. I was tired and wanted to get it done quickly so I could go back to bed. When I was done, the moment I stepped into the hall, the toilet door slammed shut behind me, even though there was no wind. I jumped in surprise, but there was nothing behind me. This isn't good, I thought, and I picked up the pace as I returned to my room. But then I felt a presence behind me. I didn't turn around, and yet I felt like I could see it. It was that black hazy figure. It was just my intuition, but I knew it was that thing from the showers. Bit by bit, that dark hazy figure was closing the distance, and, terrified, I ran as fast as I could back to my room. I locked the door behind me and then dove into bed. It seemed that figure couldn't enter my room, as it wandered around outside for a bit. Suddenly, the presence disappeared, and then I could feel something looking at me from the gap in the window curtains. Terrified, I pulled the covers up over my head, and next thing I knew, it was morning. That morning, as I was eating breakfast, I told my friend with the sixth sense about what happened. Come to think of it, when I passed the showers this morning, I didn't sense that terrible presence there, she said. So it must have been that then, I thought. I haven't seen that figure again since then. I wonder where it went. Perhaps it's still wandering around the girls' dorms, even now. While cleaning his apartment one day, a man notices something he's never seen before. A strange handle in the wall. What lies beyond it, and why does nobody seem to know about it? Find out in Small Handle. I had a dream recently that reminded me of this, so let me write it down. It happened when I was living in a rented apartment. I was cleaning one day when suddenly I noticed a small handle or something in the wall. It looked like those handles you see in sliding doors. I had been living there for close to a year by that point, so I figured I must have just overlooked it somehow. I stared at the white wall for a while, and it seemed like there was the tiniest gap in it. Curious, I grabbed the handle and slid it sidewards. Then, a room I had no idea even existed appeared. The room was covered in dust, but it appeared to be regularly maintained. There was a window, and it got great sunlight too. And in the middle of the room, there were 3 pianos. One of them was a grand piano from a brand that even I knew, and the other 2 were a regular grand piano and a regular upright piano. They were arranged in a triangle so they could all be played at the same time. Next to that was a living area with a large sofa. By that point, I began to imagine that whoever lived here, or still lived there, was rather wealthy. There were also 2 or 3 other pianos, or I guess keyboards, and the room next to that appeared to be a children's room. Inside there were 2 desks side by side, and they were both covered in school textbooks and notebooks. The name of the elementary school, as well as the students' names, were written on there. It was a school in the neighbouring town, and it seemed they were sisters who attended the same school. I thought that some mistake must have allowed access to the neighbouring apartment through mine, but there was no entrance anywhere. As such, it was impossible to live there independently. There was no toilet or bathroom either. If I had to say one way or the other, then it had to have been originally attached to my apartment, right? But the real estate agency never said anything about it, and I had checked the floor plan online several times myself. This separate room was not recorded anywhere. There were several magazines under the sofa table, and when I flicked through them, they were all old. When I checked the date, they were published in 1991. When I looked closer at the calendar on the desks, it also said March 1991. Suddenly, I grew afraid and returned to my own apartment. I put the wall back how it was and immediately contacted the real estate. I explained to the person in charge that I was able to enter the neighbouring apartment through my wall and that the occupants had left all their furniture and such behind. He was insistent, however, that there was no possible way. Creeped out, I immediately cancelled my contract. I spent some time at my parents' house nearby, and then quickly found a new place to live. Now, I live in a detached house. I don't want to rent ever again. And finally this week, a married couple live in an apartment building with a strange elevator. It keeps stopping on the second floor. But why? And is it connected to the building's caretakers somehow? Find out in Second Floor. This is a slightly scary story that happened in the apartment building I lived in a few years ago. An elderly couple in their 70s lived in the caretaker's room on the first floor, and every morning they would clean and maintain the building's common areas. The wife was very kind, and we often chatted to each other about this and that. She always decorated the window by the entrance to the caretaker's room with flowers, and the smell of them when I got home at night was soothing. As for the husband, he had a bit of a strange air about him, and he was always smiling and painting pictures for fun. My husband and I lived on the 6th floor. At some point, whenever we took the elevator down to the first floor, it always started stopping at the 2nd floor, even though nobody pressed the button. It wasn't like anyone pressed the wrong button either. The 2nd floor hall beyond the doors was dark, and a bad feeling hung in the air. Once I was curious, so I poked my head out of the elevator to look around, but I couldn't see anyone there. It was just a dark corridor and nothing else. I also checked with my husband, and he said that it often stopped on the 2nd floor when he used the elevator too. This went on for the next 3 or so months. By that point, I had gotten used to the elevator stopping at the 2nd floor. The caretaker's wife loved to chat, so I decided to talk to her and see if I could get any information out of her. That elevator often stops on the 2nd floor. Is it broken? I asked, and the wife told me something surprising. Yes, other people have told me it stops there too. And not too long ago, my husband told me that he doesn't like the 2nd floor either. Apparently, he saw something strange there, she said, lowering her voice. Eh? Something strange? I loved scary stories, so, of course, I wanted to know more. But all she said was that it was something hazy, and that was it. I couldn't help but feel like she was trying to avoid saying something, though. After hearing that, I was scared every time I used the elevator that it would stop at the 2nd floor again, so I would rest my finger on the close button every time I got in. I don't think even a month passed when suddenly the caretaker husband fell ill and passed away. The caretakers changed a few months after that, and now it's a bright, cheerful, chatty guy who travels to the building but doesn't live there. But strangely, ever since the caretaker changed, the elevator stopped stopping at the second floor. The strange thing the wife mentioned, I wonder if that was something he saw because he was sick, or perhaps something else. Recently, my husband used the stairs and he said, "There's some bad vibes on the second floor. Don't go near there." Which made me remember what happened and write it down here. A huge thank you and shout out to this week's Kami tier members, Ella C, Emerald and Kenneth Kawamoto. It's thanks to your support, along with everyone else, that I'm able to keep doing this show, so thank you very much. Don't forget to check out Toshiden, Exploring Japanese Urban Legends Volume 4, out right now. And check out our merchandise store at kowabana-shop.fourthwall.com. And if you'd like to chat about this week's stories, come and join us in the Kowabana Discord. You can find that link in the description or on kowabana.net. You can also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/TaraADevlin for exclusive bonus stories and extras, or our YouTube channel at youtube.com/KowabanaJapan for all sorts of Japanese horror you won't find anywhere else. Thanks guys, stay safe, and I'll see you again next time for even more Kowabana, true Japanese scary stories from around the internet. Want even more scary stories? Head over to kowabana.net for new translations every week. You can also join our Patreon for exclusive stories you won't find anywhere else. Head over to kowabana.net now.